While paying the deposit for our dream wedding venue, I overheard my fiancée's bridesmaid whisper, "I just hope she tells him before the ceremony." When I confronted her, she ran, and that's when I discovered my life was built on a L-I-M-Y name is Daniel. I'm 35, a clinical psychologist by training and profession, with almost 11 years of experience in private practice after getting burned out working hospital psych wards in my 20s. These days, my work is quietly unglamorous: regular clients, invoices, case notes, weak office coffee. There's the ongoing tension of caring too much. Client stories spill into my evenings, but I tell myself I'm getting better at drawing lines. My partner, her name is Julia, moved in with me about 2 years ago. She's 33, agile in every sense, corporate job in a mid-sized PR agency, always a little in motion, even sitting still. Where I am cautious and inward, Julie is the one who invents plans on the fly, fills silences in social settings, orders things I've never heard of at restaurants. We're textbook opposites attract, a phrase that used to make me privately flinch, but now just feels like someone else's inside joke. In certain light, we look like a happy couple. We rent a narrow third-floor apartment on the edge of a leafy, ambiguous part of the city, half professors, half people waiting to leave. We split chores evenly most weeks, though Julia is allergic to taking garbage out and I have, in her words, the spice tolerance of a toddler. I used to joke we must have been matched by a distracted AI. The weeks before everything changed were overcast in that ordinary, blinking way life gets when you're not expecting crisis. Days blurred between sessions, notes, microwave dinners, Julia's playlist echoing down the hall. Nothing seismic. But life, I've learned, tips on the smallest hinges. Looking back, the first flickers, what Reddit loves to call red flags, were less explosions and more whispers. I remember Julia starting to bring home more stories from her job, not complaints or office drama, but sweeping stories about her department's big rebrand, sprinkled with anonymous hints: a client with marriage problems, someone crashing under burnout, always in a tone half amused, half sighing. She'd snuggle next to me and start scrolling through her phone, a finger tapping at a message I never quite saw. I barely noticed at first. What I did notice was her sudden need to know more about my schedule. Not intrusive exactly. She'd ask in the morning if I was doing office hours, or if I'd be using my study late. Maybe she wanted to plan ahead, I reasoned. But something about her tone had changed. It was softer, but with an odd precision, like someone practicing lines in a mirror. I started, out of professional habit, I guess, to catalog small incidents. Once, I overheard Julia on the phone, her voice thin behind the bathroom door, replying, "Don't worry about it, it's handled. I can get that info," just as I entered the kitchen. She came out and switched topics, talking about a podcast she'd started, as if the call had never happened. Another time, I left a stack of client files on my desk before heading out for groceries. When I came back, the office door was unusually ajar. The files sat in a slightly different order. I told myself I was being paranoid. She respected my work, and anyway, all confidential notes were coded, clients' names replaced with initials and shorthand only I would understand. Still, without quite realizing it, I began double-checking the office lock each night. Julia began asking more questions about my work, about the logistics, the process. "How do you remember everything?" she asked over dinner. "Do you ever get people's stories mixed up?" I laughed, explained about careful notes, the way therapists encode information as habit. She listened carefully, her eyes soft but intent, and nodded as if she was weighing the answer. "Sounds like a lot to carry," she said, almost wistfully. There were no big fights, no icy avoidance, just a feeling, one I couldn't quite put language to, that something in our home was shifting. Our conversations turned slightly off-center. She'd stay up late, claiming to finish work stuff, headphones in, typing briskly. When I'd wake and pad past her on the way to the bathroom at 2 or 3 a.m., I'd see her framed by the blue glow of her screen. "Just catching a deadline," she'd say. I'd mumble goodnight and close the door. Even in the tightness of routine, there's room for secrets. If Julia was hiding something, she was doing it gently, like the slow dripping of a faucet, barely audible behind closed doors. Part of me, the therapist part, started to run involuntary diagnostics. Was she unhappy? Overwhelmed? Testing boundaries? My first instinct was to lean in, to ask gently, to remind her, as I do with my clients, that she could always talk to me if something felt off. But the second instinct, the tired man living behind the professional, was to watch and wait, to gather data before I made a scene out of shadows. Of course, the human brain is expert at protecting itself from the knowledge it fears. I told myself I was simply noticing, not distrusting. Not yet. My sessions flowed. Julia busied herself with work trips and weekend brunches, and for a while, the unease receded under the weight of the familiar. If there was a crack forming, I couldn't see all the way through yet. The first jolt came on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday morning. It began with a text from a client. Let's call him M. A gentle, anxious man in his early 40s. He'd been one of my longer-term therapy cases, working through complicated grief and isolation. His message was tentative, phrased as if he wanted to protect me. Hey Daniel, is it normal that someone online knows about those dog stories? A friend texted saying she saw a strange thread on a support forum. Sorry if this is nothing, my mind goes weird sometimes. I froze. The dog stories were a code. One of those little anchor points I used to help him ground himself, utterly specific and never shared aloud outside the safety of session. My heart thudded for a second. My professional instincts snapped awake. Reassure the client, gather information, avoid escalation. I texted back something calm but direct. That sounds odd, Em. Can you send me a link or screenshot? I want to understand what's happening, but I don't think you're imagining it. Within 10 minutes, I had the screenshot. A user, anonymized, sharing nearly verbatim phrasing from our session. No names, but the detail was unmistakable to anyone who knew. I replayed my routines. I did not discuss cases outside of supervision. My digital records were encrypted. Paper notes were kept in a locked drawer and less in use. I remembered the files on my desk the night the office lock felt off. Still, 100 rational explanations passed through my mind. I could have accidentally mentioned it. Maybe M told a friend. Maybe an old copy of notes resurfaced. I lectured myself about paranoia, about how easy it was to spiral. But as the day wore on, a brittle unease settled in. I combed through my physical and digital security, changing passwords for client folders, checking that backup drives remained where I left them. Everything looked untouched. Julia texted me at lunch, joking about how management was melting down over dumb deadlines. I stared at her message, then closed my phone. That evening, as Julia breezed in, kicking off her heels, flopping beside me on the sofa, I tried to observe her the way I'd observe a client. Watch body language, listen for sudden shifts in tone. She was animated, chatty, more attentive than usual, even made dinner. I needed pasta. Today was a marathon. Again, maybe I was projecting, but I couldn't shake the edginess under her cheerfulness. It was only later, once she drifted into a late Zoom call at her desk, that I found myself drifting to my notes, picking at tiny details, seeking patterns. A faint niggling. Had Julia started asking, how do you keep everything straight, not long before this breach? Had she offered to declutter my study just last week, even though she hated paperwork? I remembered her suggestion, only a few days before, that I try keeping session notes on my tablet instead of all those messy legal pads. It's more secure, she'd said lightly. All the real pros have gone digital. It wasn't evidence, just a constellation of little oddities. I double-checked the recent files lists on my tablet and laptop. They were as expected, until I noticed that 3 unsaved drafts had been opened mid-morning on a day Julia was working from home and I was out with a client. Had I left my tablet unlocked? Did I just forget? I tested the lock. It timed out automatically, as usual. I slept poorly, chewing it over. I caught myself rationalizing. What if I was just projecting my client's anxieties onto my own relationship? The therapist's blind spot. You notice everything, but you don't always trust your own feelings. I started, quietly and almost guiltily, to tighten security. I moved my notes to a more hidden drawer, began using a privacy filter on my laptop, set up a cheap webcam covering the study door, ostensibly bought for telehealth clients who wanted extra privacy. I set up a decoy, a document labeled private_case_notes, with deliberately false detail, just to see if it would be touched. A week passed, quiet, uneventful. Julia seemed largely her usual self, perhaps more affectionate, sometimes making small jokes about my doctorly paranoia. I realized, uneasily, that she'd started using my tablet late at night, just for Netflix, my phone's dying, which I'd never paid much attention to before. Work continued, but with a growing itch at the base of my skull. I started to notice flickers in Julia's conversations, more stories about stressed clients at her agency, with bizarrely specific situations that mirrored my own cases, only distorted and abstracted. She never named names, just drew parallels, like, imagine if you were dealing with someone's divorce and they suddenly adopted a dog. Was it coincidence? Was I now seeing ghosts in routine? From a professional standpoint, I knew I was entering dangerous territory. I was trained not to jump to conclusions, especially without data. But the stakes were too high to ignore. One more leak, even a suspicion, could see me flagged by the ethics board, my license at risk, trust with clients permanently broken. Reluctantly, I called a colleague, not for supervision, but for a discreet conversation. Someone who knew me well enough to hear the layers. I asked, out of curiosity, you ever worry about security at home? Like, your partner being interested in your notes? She paused, then replied, maybe once or twice. But if you're getting anxious, Daniel, lock it down. Trust your gut, but also your training. Her words stayed with me. I didn't confront Julia, not yet. But I gave her a neutral, almost clinical version of my routine. I've had a security concern at work, so I'm tightening up on digital privacy, just in case. If anything seems different, that's why. She smiled, a little too quickly. Jesus, isn't that a bit dramatic? For the next few days, I let the routine unfold, but I started setting silent digital traps, checked logs for device access, enabled new permissions, started keeping a parallel encrypted record of anything I saw out of place. I drafted, though did not send, an email to a friend who worked as an attorney, just the bare bones. How would you document a privacy breach you suspect but can't yet prove from inside your own home? I didn't want to believe it was necessary. Each new layer of precaution made me feel both safer and more exposed. Evenings blurred into a tense, wordless rhythm. Julia acted warm, sometimes clingy, other times remote. One night, she joked about therapists being control freaks, voice too sharp for the words to feel casual. I kept waiting for something concrete, a message, a slip, a trace of evidence that would let me believe myself. Instead, I felt suspended, a man waiting in his own house for the other shoe to drop. Spasiba, thought Bustrioik. Dvigiumsa kulminatsui. Geroyu всё еще сложно поверить до конца. Пожар эмоций сдерживается профессиональным самообладанием. Все разворачивается через детали, записи, хронологию издержания, но острую внутренние монологи. Part 3. The Exposure. It was the kind of Saturday morning that usually meant nothing more than mismatched pajamas and half-cold coffee. Julia had left early for a supposed strategy session at her office, the kind that always appeared on short notice, always on weekends. By habit, I used the quiet to catch up on overdue notes. Reflexively, I glanced at the motion-activated webcam log. I'd almost forgotten about it. There hadn't been any odd activity tag for the last few days, just our normal routines. Me working, Julia running errands, the evening Netflix glow. But this time, reviewing the overnight feed from Thursday, my thumb froze mid-scroll. 11:41 p.m. Julia steps into my study. She's wearing her fleece robe, phone in hand. At first, I think nothing of it. Maybe she'd left something. Maybe she was looking for a charger. I watch as she glances back toward the hallway, then sits at my desk. She powers on my laptop, her movements fluid and awkward at the same time, as if trying to look casual for an invisible audience. Then carefully, methodically, Julia opens a drawer, one I'd locked. My breath caught. She produces a small key from her pocket, the red plastic tag unmistakable. I'd never even realized she knew where I kept the backup. She leafs through a pile of folders. The overhead light catches the label, Archive, 2023. These files shouldn't have been needed for months. Julia takes a series of photos with her phone, quick, systematic, and then slides everything precisely back. She checks something on my computer, taps the screen, deletes a document. Which document? My memory strains for every file name I've recently edited, and returns the key. The whole sequence lasts less than 7 minutes. I watch the clip again, numb. There's nothing ambiguous here. She wasn't curious, she was careful, prepared. At no point does she hesitate. All at once, A quiet, suffocating clarity settles in. This was not a misunderstanding, not a stress fluke, not some half-conscious boundary issue. Julia, the woman I cook with, sleep beside, tell my worst client dystopias too, had deliberately accessed and documented my most vulnerable work. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a breach of law, ethics, the very core of my professional oath. I surprised myself by not shaking. Instead, my mind became painfully clear, the same ice inside I'd felt once during a patient's psychotic break in my hospital days. First, evidence. I immediately secured the footage off the cloud, duplicated it to 2 encrypted USB keys. I changed every device password, reset the Wi-Fi, and began cataloging any potentially accessed files by their last open timestamp. I made a table, file, date, suspected risk. My teaching supervisor's voice echoed in my head. Don't act from revenge. Act as if preparing for an audit. I called my friend Alicia, the lawyer, this time not by email, but from my office line. She answered on the second ring, groggy. Daniel? Everything okay? I made my voice steady. I need advice. Employment, confidentiality, home breach, by someone close. I have video evidence. Is it legal for me to record this? I never told her explicitly about the camera, but it's only in the study. She asked thoughtful, probing questions. Where do you keep your consent policy? Was she ever denied access to your study? Did you have clear physical and digital boundaries? Yes, I replied, my mind running through the paperwork, the house rules we'd set up when Julia moved in. Office off limits when I'm working, printed and emailed, signed for insurance purposes. Document everything. Don't discuss the suspicion yet. Don't delete. Don't confront. I'll check your local statutes, but you're probably covered. If this gets ugly, you want to show restraint. She could spin it. I asked the question I feared. Could she claim I was unethical with client data? That I left sensitive documents in the open? A grim pause. She could try. You'll need to prove your policies, your logs, everything. Preemptively notify your licensing board. Proactively. Don't wait for a complaint. Document your chain of custody. I hung up, took a shaky breath, and began assembling everything. Camera screenshots, file logs. The cloud admin history showing when Julia's device synced files to Google Photos. Screenshots of our house rules. By afternoon, I created an encrypted archive, emailed a summary timeline to Alicia, and drafted an email to my professional indemnity insurer asking for an urgent callback. That night, Julia came home beaming, plopping down a croissant bag and her phone on the kitchen island. Surprise, they let us out early. I watched her for a long moment, not trusting any of the warmth I felt. Every word, every gesture felt double-edged. I played normal for the evening, watched TV, asked bland questions about her day. Inside, everything was white noise. At 10:30 p.m. sharp, I received an email. My insurer wanted a call, now. I excused myself. Alicia joined by conference line. So did a representative from the board who'd flagged my privacy breach as soon as my email hit. It was surreal, explaining what I knew, what I suspected, narrating Julia's actions as if reciting someone else's story. Their advice echoed Alicia's. Do not confront yet. You have the chain of evidence. Prepare for possible escalation. She may retaliate or try to cast doubt. We will launch an internal investigation tomorrow. Document every interaction from now on. Provide us with copies of your footage and any written policies. I slept on the couch, the first time in 2 years. The following evening, Julia confronted me before I could act. She stood in the kitchen, arms folded, voice brittle. Daniel, why is our Wi-Fi different? Why did you lock down your laptop? Did you get hacked or something? You didn't even say anything. I met her gaze as level as I could. I'm following procedures. A client breach was flagged, and I'm reviewing all access points, home, devices, everything. She held the silence, then exploded. What? You think I did something? That's really charming. What? Are you going to interrogate me now? I offered nothing, letting the void stretch. The pressure built. Finally, she turned sharp, defensive. You know what? This whole therapist thing. You care more about those confidential files than your actual family. I had to get something for work, and you're acting like I'm a criminal. Her voice wobbled. I watched every shift, every performance tick. Tears just at the surface, jaw quivering, arms wringing the script. Julia, did you access my files? Did you photograph anything? She looked away, anger melting into something almost childlike. I know. I mean, maybe. I was just checking your calendar. You always keep things so secret. I thought maybe you'd scheduled something about us, about you and me. She started to cry, messy and loud, pressed her phone into my hand. Go ahead. Look, there's nothing. I did not, and she knew I would not. Instead, I simply said, I can't discuss this further. There's an internal investigation, and I need to maintain boundaries now. She let out a strangled laugh, then suddenly turned. Well, you know what? Maybe I should go public then. People should know how cold you really are. I gave up everything for this. And here you are, treating me like a suspect. That night, Julia began posting vague, emotional updates on Instagram, couched in language like, never trust someone who hides behind professionalism, and when love becomes surveillance. Mutual friends texted me, tentatively, concerned and confused. The next morning, I received a call from the ethics board, confirming their receipt of my evidence. They would escalate to a formal review. I was placed on administrative hold. No clients, no sessions, until cleared. My world shrunk to the four walls of our apartment. Within 48 hours, Julia had moved out most of her things. She left a 6-line note. I hope you're happy protecting your precious files. Maybe I did you a favor. Enjoy your fortress. She blocked me everywhere. Through mutuals, I heard she was feeding a narrative of relationship trauma, work stress, and feeling unsafe at home. Enough ambiguity to let others fill in the blanks. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent my career trying to understand the private pain of others, and now I was a byword for secrecy. The villain in someone else's unfinished story. But at least I had my evidence. I thought that would be enough. Update the weeks after Julia left spread out flat and endless, pale daylight blurring into the off-white walls of my apartment. Without clients to anchor my days, I became a witness to my own routines, making coffee, washing dishes, wandering from room to room, sometimes standing just inside my study, mouth full of old apologies I never got to say. The investigation was methodical, impersonal, almost humiliating in its thoroughness. I submitted the video, the logs, all emails and house rules. Sleep was thin. Every night, a looping reel of conversations that hadn't happened or small moments I wished I'd noticed sooner. Maybe if I'd locked that drawer tighter from the start or asked Julia directly about the first strange story. Maybe if I'd just trusted her or myself or neither. A month passed. My lawyer, Alicia, kept me grounded, reminding me to breathe and not to check online. Still, the email summaries from my professional indemnity insurer, every phrase under a microscope, felt like slow motion. The hardest part wasn't the sense of being investigated, but the realization that the process had to be this thorough. Without proof, my name could have been lost over suspicion alone. Julia, for her part, disappeared from my life with a kind of ruthless efficiency. No messages. I watched from the periphery as friends exchanged carefully neutral, hoping you're okay, texts, or simply faded out. A few even went out of their way to avoid me at the grocery store. Social capital, I learned, is as brittle as glass. Most people want a simple story, a clear villain, and are grateful to retreat into polite silence when things get messy. 2 months in, the ethics board reached their decision. A single, double-spaced letter. After reviewing all evidence submitted, the board finds no fault or breach of professional ethics on your part. The security procedures in place were appropriate. The breach was enacted via explicit circumvention by a known third party. You are hereby reinstated to practice, with no sanctions. I sat at my kitchen table reading and rereading those lines, not feeling relief at first, just emptiness and a strange, bitter taste. I forwarded the letter to Alicia, replied to my insurer, and finally, fingers trembling, logged onto our client portal, unpausing my schedule. But my old rhythms didn't come back easily. Some clients asked polite questions, others ghosted or canceled, never giving a reason. A handful sent short emails, glad you're back. The trust between me and my work felt thin, like tracing the outline of a vase shattered and carefully glued. Even my own internal monologue had changed. When a client started talking about trust issues, I'd feel a pulse of irony, a half-honest urge to apologize for something I never chose. The apartment itself felt wounded. I boxed Julia's things, old scarves, mugs, a birthday gift receipt folded under the sofa cushion, and left them in a bag by the door. The study became a fortress, password generators, two-factor authentication, a new door lock. My friends, the ones who endured, didn't say, "I told you so." They just showed up, sometimes unannounced, with a pizza or a single question. "How are you?" For real this time. The truth is I grieved not just the relationship, but the version of myself I'd imagined. Immune to garden-variety heartbreak, a man who believed his training could keep his world rational and safe. There is nothing like betrayal, I found, for exposing the fault lines across which trust and vulnerability run. Julia wasn't a monster, just someone who believed her needs justified cutting corners on someone else's life. In the end, she didn't hack me. She correctly saw and exploited the soft underbelly where professional caution ends and private faith begins. What do you do after being vindicated publicly, but feeling demolished privately? For a while, my answer was simply, nothing. I kept appointments, paid my bills, tried not to rehearse late night. What could I have done differently? Monologues in the supermarket. I deleted and re-downloaded the dating app twice before realizing I needed to do something more basic first. Learn to trust my own eyes and instincts again. Therapy helped, eventually. I found someone outside my professional circle, someone who wouldn't give advice but would sit through the silences and let me talk crap about hope and loneliness and humiliation. I started running in the mornings, not to escape memory, but just to let my thoughts unspool long enough to see the shape of them. I called my parents, for the first time in months, and told them the abbreviated version. My dad, of all people, just said, "You can do everything right and still get caught in the crossfire. That's not failure. That's just life out in the open." There is no cinematic closure, no scene where Julia admits everything, no viral post exposing the truth, no parade of apologies from doubters. Most people, I'm learning, move on quietly. The pain recedes not because justice is served, but because, over time, your own story starts to grow around the trauma until it's only a part of you, no longer the whole. Now, almost a year out, the apartment is still the same box of soft noises and warm coffee, but it's different. I don't hold on to secrets for anyone anymore. My clients come and go, and I say take care at the end of each session and mean it with a humility I didn't have before. Sometimes, after a hard day, I catch myself closing the study door with special care, key in the lock, and for a moment I feel the old sting of what it cost to defend what's mine. I don't hate Julia. I don't even wish her harm. I know enough to understand that loneliness makes people reckless, that shame and fear grow in the dark, that sometimes we choose ourselves at any cost. All I want now is to live honest, to trust carefully, to forgive imperfectly, and to carry on, knowing that truth is heavier than victory, but lighter than regret. And if I'm still a little careful, well, maybe that's just wisdom hard-earned.